You're listening to the Coast Business Radio podcast.
Gold Coast companies are among more than 200 nationwide to benefit as the federal government injects $50 million into manufacturing projects. Many Australian companies will benefit as the federal government ignites the manufacturing industry's recovery from the coronavirus crisis by tipping nearly $50 million into 220 projects right across the country. In Queensland, 543 jobs are expected to be created from a total of 40 projects. Karen Andrews is Minister for Industry, Science and Technology and the federal member for Macpherson. Karen Andrews, welcome.
Hello, how are you?
Good. First of all, a great job, a very important portfolio. What do you want to achieve by the end of this term as Minister?
Look, there's a number of things, but I'm very, very clearly focused on manufacturing in Australia and making sure that in the very near future, and hopefully well before the end of this current term of Parliament, we are in a very good position to be able to roll out what the plans are going to be for Australian manufacturing over the next 5 to 10 years. Manufacturing is probably an area where there are real opportunities for us to maximise on our strengths, and of course coming through the COVID crisis has indicated a number of areas that we could be looking at. So clearly manufacturing, setting the vision for Australia and the roadmap to get there is one of my greatest priorities.
With COVID-19, the Prime Minister said there is no map. We're just going to do our very best, and so far I've got to say, Prime Minister and Greg Hunt and everybody else has done a fabulous job. When we cross the bridge, as the PM would say, and get to the other side, what we have learned is that our manufacturing industry has been not what it should be, not for the emergency that has presented itself. So what can be done about our high cost structures to compete with the rest of the world, high energy prices, and also IR?
So, look, they're the three big issues. So a lot of work was actually being done last year. I had a number of roundtables with peak organisations and some pretty significant businesses across Australia who have long had manufacturing capability here in Australia. And the view was clearly that Australia was always going to find it very difficult to compete on a cost basis. We need to start looking at how we could compete on a value basis. We are a high-wage nation, and there's been a number of factors over many years that have contributed to that. So what are the other options for us? And I think what has happened out of the COVID crisis is a very clear demonstration of where our strengths lie. So pre-COVID, we had only one manufacturer in Australia of surgical masks, and they were probably at capacity of about 7 million masks per year. They've scaled up. We've helped them. They're now at the capability of about 60 million masks a year. Whilst we fast-tracked that and put a lot of support into it, it was still a serious amount of hard work to get that up and running. We've brought in a second supplier to do that. But we demonstrated some really key strengths in our ability to start producing ventilators, invasive ventilators here, and there are a number of manufacturers in Australia that were prepared, willing and able to pivot so that they could start producing those. Our capacity is clearly not in mass-produced goods. Our capacity sits with more the high-tech manufacturing. We've been able to 3D print the face shields that our health workers are going to be using. We're able to 3D print a number of the components for us. What we need to sort through is where our niches are in manufacturing and build on the strengths that we already have. Of course, industrial relations is going to be a key part of that, so we need to work on that system. We need to look at what our key inputs are, and that includes the cost of energy, which for most manufacturers is the single biggest input that they have.
energy, it's always in the news, as Donald would say, whether it's a windmill popping up in the plant, a field near you, or there's windmills, or whether it's solar powered or other sustainable energy sources. But where do we get our energy from? Because, there is a greater reliance on energy, especially with manufacturing. And if we haven't got that energy supply, then to achieve the other goals can be in jeopardy.
So there's three things that are happening there. So Angus Taylor is the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction, so he covers both of those areas. We're working to develop a technology roadmap so that we'll have a good look at what's happening with technology, looking to produce and finalise that report as soon as we can. Some of the key components of that will be alternate sources of energy. We are looking very seriously at what we can do with the gas market because that also gives us the benefit of reduced emissions as well as the lower price and greater supply guarantees. So that's a positive one for us. But there's also been a lot of work done on hydrogen, and our work is quite frankly world leading. So we will continue to do that, but I do need to manage expectations there, and that's probably a number of years away before we would be looking at an alternate such as hydrogen, but we need to keep working on that because that time will come around very quickly. So it's looking at a range of energy options, and that is quite clearly coal, gas, wind turbine, solar, now hydrogen. We've got hydro. We're looking at what the storage capacity is going to be for pump storage, which is what hydro effectively is. So there's a range of options there. Angus is putting together the roadmap on that, but it's really important that people are very aware of the cost of energy because they get their power bills and they look at it and they go, how can it be so high?
It's scary to say the least. Look, tell us about local firms extending their manufacturing activities with federal grants.
So we announced last year the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund, which was a program that was designed to assist our very broad base of manufacturing to upgrade their equipment, to look at advanced technologies and look at training their workers accordingly. So we've been announcing those projects. There's a couple of hundred right across Australia. There's three here on the Gold Coast that cover a wide range of areas. I was actually at Lena Broughton, one of our Australian fashion labels that manufactures right here on the Gold Coast. So they're one of the recipients. They're actually looking at automated cutting processes. So that it means that they will be transitioning their workers from the manual cutting to a more automated type of cutting, and that will improve their capability and their output and eliminate the waste. So that's just one example, but I don't think that many people realise that manufacturing on the Gold Coast is actually our third largest sector by output, and it contributes around about $7 billion into our city's economy. So everyone's very familiar with tourism and hospitality and, of course, construction, but manufacturing is actually right up there. We've got over 2,500 manufacturing businesses here on the coast, and we've got around about 14,000 people that work in that sector. So it is a significant sector for us here at the Gold Coast, and we need to make sure that we are supporting those businesses and helping them go from small to medium enterprises and from medium to large wherever possible.
It's amazing. The Gold Coast, it has not just beautiful beaches and when the pubs open cold beer, it has this plethora of industry and, again, a great job for the government to actually recognise this. Now, to obtain government support, I imagine the business has to demonstrate not only financial business credentials, but also good management practices. How do they obtain this government support?
So there are a range of funding programs that are available. The best advice that I can give is to have a look at business injected.gov.au. A lot of the information is on there. And of course, you can go to the industry department as well, which is industry.gov.au. And of course, on the Gold Coast here, we have an Oz Industry office located up at Southport. So their job is to work with businesses and to point them in the right direction for what funding may well be available, what assistance the federal government can provide them. So there's some really good options for us here on the coast, and we want to work with all of the businesses and help them build to the next level, and in the process create more jobs for Gold Coasters, particularly so our kids can stay here on the coast and not move somewhere else.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy before, talking about beer of all things. He manufactures beer, and he was just saying that this weekend is looking good. Netflix, beer and a pizza or a barbecue. It's beautiful, always beautiful on the Gold Coast.
It is indeed, and I thought it was actually quite interesting. I mean, we went through the panic buying process that started with toilet paper, and there was no need to do that. We do manufacture toilet paper in Australia and had plenty of it. But then when people thought that isolation may well be coming their way, there was a rush at the bottle shop, so people made sure that they had good stocks of alcohol and I did think, well, that's, I suppose, a very Aussie response to the situation that they were going to find themselves in. But I've been amazed at the craft breweries that have sprung up across Australia, but particularly here on the Gold Coast.
Simply amazing. A couple of my favourites, but I won't mention that because I may look like I'm biased. I won't do that at all, but there's some nice frothy places around, aren't there, Karen?
Yep, there are. The great thing about the Gold Coast is it does offer lots of things to many people. We do have the craft breweries, but we also have gin distillers that are here. And plenty of eating options as well. So it's great. Yeah,
fantastic. At the moment, takeaway, but it's still all good. Karen Andrews, thank you very much.
Pleasure.